Hello everyone, how's it going? It is Cyrnor as always, and I wanted to do something a little different today in honor of the war campaign coming to a close finally, which you can see from the title, Alliance or Horde. And unlike most of my other videos, this is not a fact-based analysis of which faction has a greater GDP when compared to their HDI index or whatever. This video is supposed to be strictly my opinion, which faction I prefer, why I prefer them, as well as some other thoughts on the matter. Now, before I actually get into the meat of the video, I need to preface it with some things, namely that just because I like a faction more does not mean I dislike the other. I'm definitely not one of the die-hard PvP people who yell for the Alliance or for the Horde, and I almost always enjoy both sides of the story in Warcraft. And the point of this video is not to appease the fellow members of the faction I prefer, or to annoy the people of the opposite faction. Rather, I'm using this as a pretext to discuss certain flaws within World of Warcraft storytelling, as well as certain good sides of it. That's because, as you'll soon see, the reason I prefer certain aspects of one faction over the other mostly has to do with the storytelling in the past 15 years of Warcraft, ever since World of Warcraft came out. So no, you won't hear any sob story about how a Horde bully from my middle school maybe joined the Alliance, or that I met my future wife while playing as the Horde. Come see me, future wife, whoever you may be. Or that I somehow ideologically align more with one faction over the other. Obviously, no judgment whatsoever to people who prefer one faction over the other due to a much more personal reason. Also worth noting that my preference is not mainly dictated by the races which compose the respective faction. I mean, everyone knows that I am a huge Orc and Troll fan, but I also really love the Draenei and the Dwarves, for instance. And for the most part, the race preferences even out. So to begin, which faction do I prefer? Well, to sum up my opinion, I believe that the Alliance mostly has much more interesting characters, while the Horde is a much more interesting faction. This is to say, at least since World of Warcraft came out. So how come? Well, we can mostly sum up this up to the development of each. Ever since World of Warcraft came out, the Alliance has been, in my opinion, pretty static. There's almost no change and very little conflict when it comes to the inner workings of the Alliance. They are the proverbial boys in blue, who are mostly the good quote-unquote guys, and they are very predictable. Since WoW came out, there's never been a real threat that could threaten the cohesion of the Alliance as a whole, only some very minor ones that were very quickly resolved, such as Varian refusing at first to admit the Worgen in their ranks. For the most part, the leadership of the Alliance always agrees on everything, or if they don't, they still collaborate. The races which compose it always work in harmony with almost no tension between them, etc. In short, they are very static in their development. On the other hand, the Alliance has some of my personal favorite characters throughout the lore. Varian and Anduin Wrynn, Moira, Bronzebeard Forest-San, Velen, Jaina Proudmoore, Gen Greymane, the list goes on. These are all very dynamic characters who have all had their share of development and change over the years, and they just so happen to also be the leaders of their respective factions within the Alliance. The Horde, though, has had a ton of development, mostly since Wrath of the Lich King. I mean, the Mantle of Warchief has changed hands 4 times in World of Warcraft's runtime, which is actually way too many times for my liking, but I digress. We've had 2 civil wars, several rebellions of varying scale, and we've had member factions threatening to leave entirely. The Trolls dislike the Elves, everyone dislikes the Forsaken, and vice versa, and there's distrust and dissent amongst most of the playable races, with plenty of discontents among their populations. In short, it's a very dynamic faction that is nonetheless very interesting, and which also is all the more bound together by their shared hardships. And ideologically speaking, the Horde is also much more interesting and dynamic than the Alliance. The Horde is a coalition of races and factions built upon necessity. They are very uneasy allies, while the Alliance is a unity of like-minded people who mostly agree on everything. To be perfectly honest, in the past I have considered doing an entire video on the philosophy and ideology of the Horde, and I might still do that, but I couldn't really do that for the Alliance, the current Alliance that is, other than saying they're the good guys. Now on the other hand, there's not as many characters that I really like among the Horde as there are among the Alliance. Just looking at their current leaders, so leaving out people like Garrosh for instance, the only ones I absolutely love that I would place roughly on the same tier as most of the Alliance leadership are Galliwix, Lor'themar, kind of Talanji, and Thrall. Everyone else among the leadership that is okay, not necessarily bad characters, but definitely not as good or as well developed as much of the Alliance leaders. All this being said, in spite of the conflict and dynamic relations within the Horde, personally I think it's also done a much better job of making one feel more welcome within its ranks, as in that you're part of a community, a family as Vol'jin called it, while the Alliance felt a bit blander, just generic good guys, like you would be part of a superhero league or something. Speaking of which, I think I should also mention what do I feel when someone yells for the Horde or for the Alliance. Honestly, when someone in game or in the lore says for the Horde, honest to god, I feel chills. When Sarfang the Younger yells it while charging at the Wrathgate, for the Horde! Even when the crowds respond to Sylvanas asking who will help avenge Vol'jin. There was one moment in the lore when someone yelling for the Horde felt wrong though, and I'm going to take credit for disliking it even before it was cool to do so. Ugh, that really just felt absolutely wrong even when it was first revealed, at least to me. As for what I feel when someone says for the Alliance, well, mostly I feel, yeah, that's cool I guess, for the Alliance I suppose. There was one exception, one moment where it honestly felt really awesome and I got serious chills. For the Alliance! Kind of ironic that they're part of the same cinematic now that I think about it. And also this moment. For the Alliance. Both of the times it's Rin doing it, also come to think of it. Though what really makes me feel patriotic, for lack of a better term, in regards to the Alliance is this. Which also applies to the Horde, but that's really a personal preference. Now, all this is not to say that I think the Horde's story development is flawless, or that all of the Alliance characters are awesome. Just as an example, I utterly dislike the idea of Sylvanas being War Chief since its inception, and I find Muradin Bronzebeard to be a rather bland character, just as an example again. It's also worth noting that the points I brought up apply to the Horde and the Alliance as seen since World of Warcraft released. If you were to ask me whether I thought the Alliance of Lor'themar was an interesting and deep faction, and whether the old Horde had great characters, I'd say a definite yes for both of those. The Alliance of Lor'themar was filled with inner tensions and its dynamics and factions were extremely interesting, and yet still encompassed the feeling of being, quote, the good guys, while almost every character in the old Horde was great. Doomhammer, Gul'dan, Hellscream, Zul'jin, and so on. So these are my thoughts. The Horde leadership is lacking in great characters, while the Alliance is lacking in development and internal dynamics. Of course, this is just my personal opinion. I would be very interested in hearing in the comments which faction you prefer and for what reason. It's all good if it's a personal reason or a more story focused one like myself, or if you just think orcs or dwarves are cool. Do keep in mind that I will keep an eye on the comments and I won't allow shouting matches to emerge. Disagreement is fine, but yelling at one another and calling everyone names is not. I don't really think it'll be the case though, since the vast majority of the people who comment on my videos are quite civil and I've had plenty of positive and constructive discussions with you over the years. So yeah, thank you all very much for watching, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I'll see you all next time. Farewell.